It's Heather with the Leadership with Heart podcast. And today I am super duper duper thrilled to have Danielle Shoots on as my guest. And I saw her, like many of my guests, I saw a post that she had that was about her, I think, on LinkedIn. And the focus of her business and what her life's work is like super interesting. I've never really had anybody on there. And I really feel like it really is heart-based work. So that's why I wanted to have you on here, Danielle. I wanted to go a little deeper. Welcome.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Leadership with the heart it's all I'm about.
I could tell. So I'm really good at picking them. I've never gone wrong. So tell everybody now, like, now they're intrigued. Where are you right now in your leadership journey?
Yeah, it's so interesting. So above all things, I say that leadership is what I've done in my career. So I became a CFO. I'm in finance, but as chief financial officer for the first time when I was 26 years old. So like overnight, I went from being an individual contributor with my checklist and getting my stuff done to having a team of 30. And it was the state health department in Colorado. And so folks had worked in their jobs longer than I'd been alive. Like that was my first time having a team, like being a leader on paper in that way. And so that was really, really hard, but they grew me up, right? Like they knew more than I was ever going to learn. Most of them were moms. Like they just had so much to give me. And I remember I wasn't doing well in the beginning for the first 4 months or something. And not until I was sort of vulnerable about like who I actually was beyond this young woman who had gotten this job. Until I did that, I really didn't understand what leadership was. And I say that because I had my son Kai when I was 16 years old. And so by the time I got to this place at 26, he was 10. And I really didn't talk about it. Like I didn't talk about being a mom. I was married. I had my daughter by then. I didn't talk about my life. I kept them very separate. And that was causing me to have to carry too much. You don't realize how much you're carrying when you're like leaving pieces of yourself off the table like that in those moments. And I remember telling them like, I feel really insecure about being called inexperienced or about being the youngest because I've always been the youngest. I'm the youngest mom in every space I'm in. And being young when I do things was actually a shame I carried. And folks were celebrating it but for me, it was attached to shame. And so I didn't talk about it. And it was till I came free with that. I couldn't do leadership. And when I realized, oh, that's it. Like, that's the thing, like that vulnerability is what you're going to have to give to the world. I started to, study leadership as much as I did money, and understand like, who am I and what am I going to be bringing to the table, and have led teams as big as 60, had teams of 60 people in 7 states at the age of 30, and my whole life. And now I would say I launched a venture fund this year. We invest in founders of color. And now I think leadership is needed from me more than anything I've ever done, right? My org chart's much smaller. And full of professionals and folks who actually do more for me than I do for them probably on a daily basis. My team's so amazing, but I have to lead because this is systems changing work. This is really like, we're going to light this thing on fire and bend it backwards. And so it's requiring this whole new level of authenticity, vulnerability, but even more so at 37 now, I'm like, I have to also trust myself in another way. And I'm not able to be fueled by external affirmation the way I used to for the first 10, 15 years of my career. Now I'm having to find it in me every day. And so that's where I'm at. That's the new part of this journey, because it's a journey. I love that you said that it doesn't end. Like I feel like I'm going in a circle, like to the perfect 5-year-old I used to be, and now back to myself.
That's such goodness. Anybody who knows me knows I love warm chocolate chip cookies and like hot cocoa. I'm big time into like the fall and all. And that made me think just now of like that fireplace with warm chocolate cookies. That was awesome. Like you come back to home, like you've come full circle and arrived where you're supposed to be and doing this great, great work. Tell us a little bit more about the work, because I'm super intrigued just by the work. I think anybody would be listening is interested in this too.
Yeah, so we launched a venture capital fund. So we invest in founders and founding teams run by folks of color who are in startup. So early stage, we like you to have some traction, but for the most part, we just want to hear your idea and get on board with you on whether or not you can grow and scale that business. It's venture, so it's growth businesses. We want to create a bunch of $100 million businesses run by folks of color in Colorado. So that's our goal. And we cut checks anywhere between 250 and $1 million per round. And I believe in investing. I believe that we need to get our community into the machine that is wealth building. That's the work I'll do for the rest of my career, is to grow wealth for my community, because I know that we won't need charitable responses when we are creating wealth for ourselves and the generations to come after us.
What amazing work. I mean, that is just like, you're right. That is like the earth shattering work. That's the work, like you said, let's light on a fire and bend it backwards. I love that,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
concept. So true. I always say, like, for me, people are like, how do you do so much? How do you do so much? And it's like, I feel like it's a calling, which is what it sounds like for you. Like, there's just like, when you feel called to do a particular type of work, there's just, it's not really a day of working. It's like just a day of like life-changing effort in a way.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I've worked. This is not that, right? It's work, but it's not, it's totally different. I'm walking in my purpose. There's like the universe, the tools in my toolkit, all the experiences I've had in my career, good and bad, have come together for such a time as this for me. And so it's an unbelievable amount of pressure when you are actually like, whoa, this might be my purpose in the world. But it's also, not work. It's also, it's bringing me back to myself. It's bringing me back to a whole version of myself that has been gone for a long time.
And I think that's so appropriate given the work you do. I am a DEI consultant as well, which is partly why it was that way. But I also really focus a lot, in my consulting firm, we focus so much on helping organizations listen to all voices at work to really drive strategy forward. So it's really like, how do you do that? And how do you use those voices to action plan and drive strategy? How do you do that? And that's really what we focus on. Because I do believe in that work, and the DEI work, is that if we can't get listening right, if we can't really seek to understand, like you said, like meet people where they're at, like understand them as whole people, we can't really meet their needs inside the workplace. I am curious for you, where does that drive to lead come from? I mean, being a 16-year-old mother and then getting to where you're at now, like, where does that drive to really break all odds come from?
You know, I have to be honest that this is why I honestly feel like we're born who we're supposed to be. I've always been like this, like always. Elementary school, we didn't have a dance team. They wanted me to play basketball. I wanted to dance. I started one. Like, they're like, you got to find a teacher. Like, I've always been like this. Like, I don't think it's that I want to break barriers, because if I'm being honest, I don't know they're there until I've already walked through there, right? Like, I don't spend a lot of time, and not a lot of people have spent a lot of time in my life saying like, oh, like, you realize like nobody else has ever done that, or like, that's not the conversation. I'm grateful for that. Like, my parents didn't really say like, here's all the statistics that are working against you, right? They were unbelievably disappointed when I got pregnant at 16, but I think they also knew me, right? And so this venture fund has been hard because I know the data. It's almost harder knowing how few Black women do this, how few companies of color are founded. So when there's all this noise, right, in the system, it's harder to operate in truth and to trust yourself. And so I haven't paid as much attention to the noise. I think there's something super intact with my intuition, and it's always been there, and I've not ever lost it fully. And I know a lot of people have. Life traumatizes us. And what happens in that is that you lose yourself, you lose the gut. And I've kept the gut with things. I've been able to move through fear. I'm not fearless. I actually hate when people say that. I'm afraid all the time. I just move through fear in a way where my intuition stays whole. So I think part of it is I've been like this. Part of it is the hardest thing that's ever happened to me actually created the greatest gifts in my life. And I bring myself back to that. My son is the most important thing that's ever happened to me. And it was very, very difficult. And so my ability to understand that hard things, that the storm is actually where you get built, I keep that. It helps me navigate the storms. I don't have less than anybody, and I'm not less afraid than anybody, and I don't have less failures than anybody. I just think I do have an organic way, plus a lived experience and examples to draw myself back to, of surviving the storm.
I love that. I have a feeling like inside of what I saw on you and that just like announcement on LinkedIn, it was like, oh, I knew there had to be something boiling beneath the surface. There's like something there like that produced that human, that brilliant human. And I have that same type of like fight, but I have that same type of backstory that has adversity and I do, when I speak to people, I'd say like, oh my gosh, it's just like we build muscle, we have to tear the tissue. We can't have beautiful, wonderful muscles unless we actually work them, and we have to sweat and it has to hurt. And that's exactly what our life is like. We have to hit a wall. We have to overcome the obstacles and the barriers in order to even get resilient, to get like, and to be where you're at, to come on the other side. I love all of those messages. Oh my gosh, for those who are listening, like you just need to rest in some of this stuff, seriously, because it's really, really good. I'm curious to know that those that are on your team now, on your venture team, what would they say about your leadership style? How do you lead? What would be the words that use to describe you, I guess?
I think they would use authentically. I think that they would say I'm very trusting of them. I know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. I let people be good at what they're good at, and I hope that they give me the same. I work as hard as I would ever ask anyone else to work, and that I think what they would say, especially this team, because this team was built from people that worked for me in previous lives, and they came to do this thing with me, which is really special. And this team would say, Danielle lets us be ourselves. She does that so that she can be herself too.
Oh, that is just a gem right there. As we think about, I talk a lot about like self-care, just like being able to be ourselves, and also like leaning into like this whole idea of vulnerability that you said, saying, okay, I'm going to take a time out to kind of take care of me, and then giving other people the ability to say, oh, I'm actually kind of broken right now. Can I take some time? Like all of that working in the environment. I don't want to call it a family because I know people hate to use that word, but I think just the relationships built, the connectivity, the connection that's built by allowing others to be themselves, which means it's going to be hard, which means you have to give them their space, and all of the, and vice versa. It's just it's a culture of respect, isn't it? Mutual respect and connection.
Yeah, well, we love each other. I mean, I have no problem saying that. Like this is when my chief of staff or my executive assistant and I get off the phone, we say, I love you. And we do. And it doesn't mean that there might be a day where they go do something amazing and great away from me. They will. Like, I would never hold them back. It doesn't mean that there's people that I love that work for me that I've had to fire because this wasn't the right thing for them, but that's love too. And so when we really think about what it means to love and to spend this much time with people, I would do anything to see their entire lives be whatever they want them to be, and they would do the same for me. And so that, I love having my own company because that is something I can say and do with such pride. We love each other very much.
Yeah, I think about that. You're so right. As we think about larger environments, larger organizations that you worked with, it's a little harder to get away with it. You can say it, and people are like, because there's so much mistrust, period. And I remember there was one gentleman I worked with, and it took him like 3 years to trust that I was really like, that I actually cared about he and his team. Like when I was asking about their opinion, or when I was saying you're doing a great job, that it was coming from a place of realness, that I wasn't just doing it to get something from him. And it took a while to break through the core. But I think it's just because in the workplace, it's just not, it doesn't usually happen. We don't necessarily experience that. So when you have your own thing, like I do too, I can just like show up any way I want. I could do emoji faces. I can do kissy faces. I could say, I could do whatever I want because that's my thing. I don't have to ask permission. I don't have to wait for somebody to tell me, wait, you're being a little bit too touchy-feely, Heather.
That whole too touchy-feely, Lord, the world needs some touchy-feely in it, right? So like, let's just let women lead the way that we naturally do, because that will change the entire game, especially women of color, like Black women. Like that's a special, if we just leave them alone.
I know. What can we do in the world?
Right? Like let them operate in who they are and the lessons that life teaches you, even if you don't want to. But yeah, I'm a lot. Like I'm hard charging. I have really, really high expectations of myself. It's none of that. I'm not sacrificing any of that. But I do want to demystify the resume. And I hope to leave a legacy where I did, right? The resume can be what it is, but I hope that people know what the journey was. And if we start talking about the journey more than the outcomes, we'll be in a much better society.
Love it. I'm just going to meditate on that for just a minute. Okay, so we're at that part of the episode of the podcast where I want to ask you this: what can you think of a story or a time when you were not that best leader, when you weren't as inspiring, you maybe weren't as supportive, maybe you just did it in your mind, you're like, oh, and it's a specific story, so not like an era or a time, but like a story. What did that look like, and what did you do? Like, what happened, or what was the catalyst for you to kind of come out of it more enlightened? And I wouldn't say perfect because I don't believe in that word, but just come out of it more enlightened.
Yeah, I mean, I have stories from every thing I've ever done in my career where I wasn't getting it right, but I'll give you the most recent, which is that when I launched this fund, I was afraid. I left my very cushy, very well-paid CFO job, and I launched this fund, and I was afraid that all the fear that came into this space around being on my own, and I've made billions of dollars for the companies I work for, but I'm worried I'm not going to be able to do it for myself. I took on a ton of consulting work because I was so afraid that the fund wasn't going to work. I was getting in my own way. And so I just was a mess. I was a mess. I just wasn't myself as a leader. I was not competent. I was exhausted all the time. Like, I wasn't able to feed my team the way I normally do energetically. I'm the one that's usually like, we got this. And it was a really hard time, and I was barely leading at all. If I'm being honest, I was surviving for a 6-month period. When I decided to launch this fund, I was surviving. I was crippled in fear on many days. And so I'm coming out of that now. Like, I'm coming back to myself as a leader now and feeling more confident, and we've got our feet under us. And now I'm serving them again, but they were serving me for 6 months in a way that I'm really grateful for, because I certainly wasn't my best. I certainly was struggling.
What was that catalyst? I mean, like, because just me, like a social scientist kind of person. I want to know, what was the catalyst? What was the thing that made you stop having, like, leading with fear, or like, there had to be something. What was the catalyst for that?
I have this amazing human in my life who coaches me, and whether I like it or not, he's a phenomenal leader and a brilliant businessman. And we were talking one night, and I said, I'm really lonely. And he said, no, you're not. Like, what? Yes, I am. I'm lonely. He said, no, you're not. The fact that you can say you're lonely out loud to somebody inherently means you're not lonely. This man's like a linguist. And I was like, he goes, you're bored. And I was like, oh, like, I couldn't unhear it. He's so right. Like, what had happened is I jumped in to do this thing that I knew all the data behind it. So I knew there's not a lot of Black women who've been successful at this. Raising money is brutal. Like, it's all, so I was living with the data. Again, I knew the barriers before I was trying to cross them, and that had never really happened to me in that way. And so my expectation is that this was going to be the hardest thing I ever did. And he's like, you're bored. Your team is small again. You're building this thing. You thought it was going to be the hardest thing you ever did, but in a lot of ways it's not. And you've demystified investing to yourself in a way where you're like, this isn't that complicated. Like, we got this, we can do this. And so my boredom made me feel like I was actually, like, not doing something right. Like, the fact that I didn't feel super challenged by what I was getting myself into made me feel like I was like, I was carrying such imposter syndrome and so much fear every day. Cause I'm like, what did I screw up? Right. And you don't want to screw this up. I don't want to screw this up. The next 5 Black women that want to start a venture fund. And so because I felt like, oh, like, all right, I got that thing figured out, that piece of it. And yeah, this is like building a business. And I was able to relate it to everything that I had done in a way that I honestly felt like I was just doing something wrong every day. It was such imposter syndrome. And so I was like, oh, you're so right. He's like, you're not spending your time in the way you need to. You're not energetically around people that are just like challenging your brain and pushing you, and you don't have a big team. So that's not, you don't have that to push you right now. And so he's like, you're having a hard time finding fuel to be what you know you're capable of being, because you're just not trusting yourself.
Wow. And that's amazing. That's what I knew there was something. There's always, like, because it's like, most people don't just wake up and go, I'm doing this differently. Like, there's always like something. And in this case, like, this person really challenging you and making you think, go deeper was what you needed.
We reworked my whole schedule around that idea of how I'm spending my energy, like if I'm raising money, I can't do that for 3 days in a row for 8 hours a day. Like if I have pitches, like I'm not getting a reciprocal energy in that space. And so like my team and I, like, we just got together and like, how do we figure this out? And they've been so helpful in having my calendar be something that is manageable, number one, and energetically manageable, so that I have time to brainstorm and whiteboard and do the things that stimulate my mind. I'm a problem solver, and this is a very big problem we're solving.
Yes.
But there's not a bunch of little ones in the meantime, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so I'm like, okay, we're literally changing the world, I hope, solving this incredibly systemic issue that's happening in our country that's going to change economies. So what can we do to just be creative in the meantime and use our brains in different ways?
So now we have arrived at the point of the podcast where the kind of tables are turned, and you ask me just one question, or ask me whatever you want, something that me, and I'm like the workplace expert. So that's anything related to the workplace. Are there any questions or anything that just you want to ask?
Favorite question that always helps me take something from people, which is, what was the hardest day on your leadership journey?
I actually have to say, I was working for an organization that was going through a merger of 5 companies. And at some point, my job changed without me knowing it. In fact, someone inside this merger like gave away my job and took away my team and like put me in this individual contributor role, all through a internal Facebook post. It was internal to the company, a internal Facebook app that you can use for companies.
Oh my God.
I just happened to look, and someone was celebrating that they had this new role. And I was like, what was that? And while that was super enlightening for me, and it made me realize the work I needed to do, which is the work I do today, which is being more inclusive on decision-making. How do you include more people's voices, right? How do you not fire people on an internal Facebook group, that kind of thing? Right? Yeah, it's like, what was the hardest part was actually losing my team.
Oh yeah.
Because what fuel for me is having things happen through other people for the larger good, kind of like what's going on in your end. But I realized that having a team circled around a mission, a focus, that's a direction, like that you go forward and you got a bullseye on, everybody's marching in that's the thing. So then I didn't have like a team, meaning a team of direct report, like people who together, like hey, here's what we're doing, and here's how we're going to steer the ship. And what do you think? We're going to steer the ship this way. What do you think? And just that kind of thing. I didn't have it. It was for a short period of time, but it was enough of time where I felt completely lost. Like I had no North Star, because I'd been leading teams my whole life. So while that other thing was like, ouch, and believe me, like that person got an earful and I learned a lot, and voila, I'm a multi-time author. I'm a speaker, like all the things I'm doing now is because of that person. Like that's a catalyst for me. Yeah. Over here is the thing of like, I got to have a team. So I would say that was the most painful day, is losing for the first time ever, like not having a team that we could be working together to do things together. So
yeah, that's hard when your fuel source changes, especially if you don't realize how much of a fuel source it is. And what they don't tell you is, if you're on any type of healing journey, which I have been, how much trauma might have been the thing that was fueling your success. And so when I started to heal, and I got divorced and went through some really hard stuff, and I just like started to get better. And so the external affirmation of other people didn't motivate me in the way it used to. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I don't need to please people, can I do this again? Can I replicate success again? Can I build something and be the first or the only, like I had been the rest of my career? That was a fuel source for me before, and it's gone because I'm healthier and have boundaries. So it's like finding new ways to motivate yourself. And there was a lot of work I had to do on myself finally, because the thing that was actually causing me a lot of internal damage and harm, which was to people please and need everyone to affirm me and not really know who I was, had actually made me quite successful in my career. So that is a wild realization to come to. Yeah.
You and I have that. I'm telling you, we have that same, we both have that, like that thing right there. You and I share one wholeheartedly. One day we'll talk offline about those journeys, and you'll see what I mean by that. Okay, so for those who are listening now, what might be a couple pearls of wisdom you'd leave them with, giving like your background, the context, the journey, and thinking about other leaders who are listening and they might need some extra motivation. They might need help going down their path. What might be a couple pearls of wisdom you'd leave them with?
Yeah, I think the thing about leadership to do it well is that you have to really be in alignment with yourself. And the only way to be in alignment with yourself is to know yourself, good, bad, ugly, beautiful, and everything in between. And so I always just tell leaders, it's like it's time to journey back to yourself. Like if you really want to lead, and I mean lead, you change systems, you light the world on fire, you are the person that people talk about as having an impact on their life in some way. That's leadership, right? The influence over people. If you want to do that well, you better know who you are, because wherever you go, you're going to take you with you. And I think if leaders can know who they are and walk lovingly and gracefully in that, and not in shame, we will live in a different world. So go on the journey back to yourself. Like, who were you born to be? What are you good at? How do you use what you're good at in service to other people? How do you use what you're good at to make decisions for yourself? Have the audacity to use what you're good at to make decisions about who you're going to be and what you're going to do in life, and you'll be okay. Like, you can withstand anything if you know who you are, because nobody's going to be able to tell your story better than you.
I love that so much. I love it. Everything, like each time I get into these points where there's like points of meditation, where I'm just like listening. And part of the last book I wrote was called The Art of Caring Leadership. And the first chapter is on self-leadership. And this first subchapter is on knowing your why and your purpose. And so I 100% believe that we have got to start there. And it is true, even for me, that whole idea of trauma driving the success. And this idea of trying to get better, trying to get healthy, realizing you don't need that stuff outside. And as leaders, it can be quote unquote lonely, right? It can be. But I think if you do what you're talking about, which is finding what lights us up, lights our heart on fire, gets us excited again, it doesn't have to feel like you're doing it alone. It doesn't have to feel so lonely. And
leadership's especially lonely if you need everybody to like you. Like, if that's what you define, then it is a really lonely place. If you recognize what it's going to be and that not everyone's going to sing your song, then you'll have a much easier time. You'll feel much more belonging than you will if you need everyone to like you.
That's so true. Oh, so for those who are listening right now, please do share this far and wide. This is some good and deep stuff. I mean, this really is going to take us into the year, into this last quarter to the year, with lots to think about, lots to do, lots of mindset shifts. And Danielle, I really appreciate you. I'm so glad I reached out to you, and I'm glad you said yes.
Me too. Thank you so much. This is important work you're doing here.
Thanks everybody for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. Be well.